All right. So I was told to talk about how I got to where I am first. So I'll do that first here a little bit. So um I've I've always been interested in fish. I mean, my dad has pictures of me as a little kid, like 2 years old, playing in a stream, catching fish with little nets. Um and by the time I got into high school, I was already keeping lots of aquariums and even breeding fish. In fact, the first fish I ever bred in captivity is the spotfin shiner. So that was kind of cool. I was in high school breeding spotfin shiners in aquariums. Um, and then, so by the time I graduated high school, I knew that I wanted to work with freshwater North American native fish, not saltwater. I really didn't have that much interest in saltwater. I wanted to do stuff locally. Um, and I got a copy of Milton Trotman's book. I think when I was still in high school too. My grandma worked at a library, and they were throwing one out, and so she just, oh, Brian will like this. It's a fish book. Had no idea that it what it was, just that Brian would like this, and gave it to me. And by the time I was in college, I started finding things in there. I'm like, well, I've actually found this fish here that's not in the book, and I actually tried to convince Jeff Miner for my master's to rewrite Fishes of Ohio as a master's project. He told me that's crazy, so that didn't happen. But I eventually, after my master's, did get to do that. But that was after a couple of temporary jobs, short-term jobs, sort of thing. I worked um, different internships, summer positions, doing work with consulting companies or work for MBI, which is like a nonprofit too. But all kind of going towards that goal. And then I worked in a 2-year term position with, I was technically an OSU position started in the spring of 2008, um, after finishing up my master's. And it was with Division of Wildlife at the Inland Fisheries Research Unit. And the whole time I worked there, every time I get one of like the higher up guys in the room with me within Division of Wildlife, I'd always talking about some kind of non-game fish that they probably couldn't care less about. Um, but when that was coming to an end, I was in a meeting with, at that time, the fish chief, and I was probably on some rant about who knows what kind of non-game fish, and said, and he just looked at me, he stopped me, and he looked at me, he said, "Wouldn't it be cool if we could just pay you to run around the state and find things for us?" And little did I know that he already knew that they were going to start what they called the Ohio Biodiversity Conservation Partnership at Ohio State. This would have been probably October, November of 2010, and that started in 2011, early 2011. So I had like a 2 month period where I wasn't working for Ohio State. I worked for the Wilds actually, and then started on that statewide distribution assessment of all species. So in the state, so it's kind of how I got to that. And then as that project kind of came to a conclusion of sort of building maps for every fish in Ohio, I noticed from doing that um, there were places where it seemed like other things had recovered, and but we're still missing a species. So I kind of approached Division Wildlife again and said, "Can I do some reintroduction efforts?" And so there was a little bit of overlap between those. I was still doing some of the distribution work for the book, finishing up um, from like 2015 to 2018. I think it was published in 2018 or 19. Now I don't remember, one or the other, but a little bit of overlap. So I actually started doing reintroductions in 2016. So this presentation is basically the past 10 years of doing reintroduction efforts of state listed fish. So um, yeah, I don't know. And that's kind of how I got to where I'm at this point. So um, I guess if anybody has any questions about the first about that, I can stop for a second. But if not, just go into this. So okay. All right. So the reason why the title's worded the way it is the funding for these projects comes from state wildlife grants. So for that funding source, everything has to be on Ohio's list of greatest conservation need to be able to use the funding for it. So basically, it just means that they have to be fish species that are state listed in some way. I can't technically work on a species unless it is state listed. Um, so that's why. And Dr. Pintor is the PI that I work under at Ohio State. So she's the third PI I've worked under. I keep outlasting the PIs, but that's okay. Let's see. It's not just the arrows, right? Should advance it.
Yeah,
I think.
click the screen once.
Oh, click the PowerPoint on here like that. Okay, then it should go with this. Yeah, I think it's working now. Yeah, looks like it's working. Should be good. Okay. So, um, I kind of said the first part of this, but and how these are funded. Lots of different partners with these. Um, I have designed and led a lot of these reintroduction projects, but there's lots of other people involved, from agencies to county park systems and just a lot of volunteers even. So um, said two kind of main areas of focus. One is translocating riverine fish. So rather than any kind of captive propagation, we actually go out and borrow from existing populations, catch a whole bunch, and then move them to a historic area where they used to be. And then we have done captive propagation as well, and that has primarily been with fish that are found in natural lakes and or wetlands. Because that's probably our group of fish in Ohio we've destroyed the most. Some of these are just completely gone from the state, so there's no source to draw from. Um, so for these projects, we try to do a preliminary survey at the release site that we're going to use in the future. Um, and then use kind of from there, take a couple different directions. A lot of, I don't know, several of the species we work with are riffle dwelling. So four different darter species and then a mad tom at this point. And so we use a method that I kind of saw other people do in grad school, basically, where we are combining a backpack shocker with a seine. So that's the top photo there. Um, and that's really effective for anything that's a riffle dwelling species. So a lot of darter species, some mad toms, those sort of things. There are some minnow species that would be true for too. Um, we just use a small, it's actually the legal size seine for Ohio, 4 foot by 8 foot seine. And then record effort is both how many attempts we made, basically setting the seine and shocking to it, and also the amount of time. Um, and typically we'll do 2 to 3 riffles per site. So you get kind of some replicates. And then once we do release the fish, they're released usually in the center one of the three, so we can see a little bit of potential movement at the site too. Um, for species that are not riffle dwelling, so either lake or one species of darter, the longhead darter is more pool dwelling that we've worked with. So we're usually either doing boat or tote barge electrofishing for those, and do that as sort of, they're both done as full community samples, but you get a kind of a portion of the community when you're doing a riffle survey. You're not really getting everything, so you get a broader effort with the larger electrofishing gear. Um, in most cases, for all these translocated fish, they're tagged with VIE tags or visible implant elastomers. It's basically just giving the fish a tattoo of a soft plastic. And so it's not an individual tag, it's more of a batch tag. So the whole group of fish released at that date has the same color and position on the body of the fish in terms of how they were tagged. Um, Try to vary the donor sites. So we don't keep going to the same spot to catch the fish and then put them in the same release site year after year. Try to vary as much as possible. If these are 5 years, get 5 different source locations for one release site, and so that you get a better genetic base to your initial population. Um, and again, also try to get that source population from as close as possible to where you're putting fish too. So you're not taking them from some greater distance than you need to. Um, and then for the captive breeding for the glacial lake species, we get new bird stock every year. So we're not perpetuating the same small genetic pool. Um, I prefer the translocation because I think we get a better start of populations, and it's actually more cost effective too, but in some cases you just can't do that. There's just not enough of them. So um, these are kind of all the translocation projects we've done so far, and I'm just going to kind of go through each of these and show some highlights because it's too many to give a ton of detail, but we'll go through them a little bit. So, and they're kind of in chronological order too of like the most recent ones. So the very first one we did was actually with the bluegrass darter. This species, they actually kind of changed the greatest conservation need list a little bit here recently. Now it is only things that are state listed. Before that, it was actually a bigger list. And this fish was delisted back in 2012, basically because of our distribution surveys, finding that there just too many of them around the state. So it was almost like our practice project. So we only did this for 2 years as far as releases, and it was initially set up to also be a PhD project under Dr. Majeka Sullivan originally at Ohio State. It didn't finish that way. It just became the reintroduction. The student actually left, so we just never finished that part of it. But the reintroduction part was finished up. We did the 2 years. One of the cool things is we stocked these in June, and this is a species of darter that spawns all summer long. It's not one of the ones that spawns a brief period in the spring. So we got reproduction the first year. So we saw 4 young of the year in our first follow-up survey in September. So we did the release in June, come back to the same site in September, and we got 4 young of the year that first year. It's not many, but that we found any at all the first year is actually rather impressive because we got I've talked to people who've done this elsewhere and they'll tell me sometimes you don't find anything for 5 years, so don't get frustrated. So to get that result immediately was pretty impressive. And then the by the following year, we caught 37 that were larger individuals. So I think that there's probably some sampling bias that we don't see those tiny young of year. I think that they probably actually go through the same. They're too small to capture as part of that. So to get 37 that would have been that first year class in the second follow-up survey was really good sign. And one of the things I didn't expect with this is by tagging these, we could see some movement. We had 2 sites that were almost 7 river miles apart, and we found a couple of individuals, I think it was only 2, that actually had traversed that for a little tiny 2-inch long darter that we got at a different site. So one of the things I was not convinced that 2 years was enough of stocking with this. And we saw those individuals kind of decrease in terms of the tagged individuals over time, which is what you expect. But one of the things that I didn't expect is just how long some of these lived. We got recaptures much longer than I expected. So some of these, we got one that had been tagged 8 years ago. So at least 8 years, maybe 9-year-old darter, which is kind of crazy to think about that fish actually was been around that long. So by 2024, we didn't find any, and we did 10 years of sampling. So this finished up last year. So this just kind of shows you just the overall totals of captures each year. It's not by catch per unit effort or anything like that, just our total captures. So they did continue to increase through the whole thing. 2025, so some of these, I should say this about all of them. I've updated, this is like my general talk I often give. So some of these have the 2025 data, some of them don't yet. So, but I can tell you that it went down a tiny bit in 2025, but it was still the second highest year. So for our final year. So, and we did not get any recaptures. There'll be a few of these, but that's the tag on this. There's a few other ones that we'll see it. So, yeah, I think that's kind of it with that one. So the overall effect of that species is this area right here. As you can see, they had re-expanded quite a bit. All the red is the most recent records. So they were doing fine in Ohio. So this, as I said, this was kind of the practice project. So after that one, moved on to things that were actually still state listed. So the Tippecanoe darter in the Upper Muskingum Basin hadn't been seen there since 1962. And luckily we had this preserved specimen in the OSU collection to have definite proof that they were there at one time. And they still existed in the Muskingum system below the last 2 dams. So this is our biggest river in Ohio. If you're not familiar with it, it has 10 dams down the main stem that are actually from the 1840s. They're part of the old canal system to get canal boats up through that system. So they're very old. We actually don't really even have a good record of what was in the main stem Muskingum prior to it being dammed because it's been dammed for so long. So we chose 6 locations in the upper part of that basin, kind of around the historic locality. Um, 2 in the Cocosing, 2 in the Wahoning River, 1 in Tuscarawas, and 1 in main stem Muskingum near Coshocton, Ohio. Um, and planned this one to be a 5-year project for releases. And there's a huge population in the Scioto River. The species had re-expanded on its own really well in the Scioto River Basin south of Columbus, so that was our donor population for this. So this is what their distribution looked like when we started. So as I said, all the red is the most recent. So this is the Scioto Basin. Here's our historic locality, Upper Muskingum, and the 2 remaining localities in the lower end of the Muskingum. So, um, so we completed, the goal was 200 per year per site. So we completed this actually pretty easily. These were one of the easier ones I've worked with in terms of capturing plenty to move. And they are tiny. This is the second smallest fish in Ohio. So um, learning to tag lots of teeny tiny little fish is fun, right, guys? It's fun tagging tiny fish. So you can see the tags in these guys. I think our record size for a tippet canoe, the males do get a little bit bigger. I think it's 43 millimeters. So this just gives you an idea how little these guys are. They were, as this project's going on, kind of because of the project, but also their own kind of increase in distribution across the state, they were downgraded from threatened to a species of concern in 2022, thanks to kind of this and their own expansion. Do plan to do follow-up surveys for a total of 10 years with this. So this is kind of those raw numbers so far. This isn't catch per unit effort, just total catches. And you can see we stopped stocking here, and pretty quickly we lost the tagged fish. We did get 2 recaptures last year, but just 2. But these guys are really showing up in a big way at these sites. They're thoroughly established. Yeah, well, that's the first ones back in 2018 going into Cocosing River, and I keep forgetting to put a picture of my daughter who is now taller, well, almost taller than me. That's her taking them down the bike path. But so this is what this looks like actually in catch per unit effort. So this is the tip canoe darters per minute. And the 3 things here are the recaptures. So you can see that one kind of drops off. And that's actually fine. We want to see that. We want to see the natural recruits surpass them and continue to increase, which has happened. I probably didn't really need to put the combined one on there, but whatever. The red one's just a total of both. This is the 6 different sites across the Muskingum Basin. So they've done really well. We did had a little bit of a drop at a couple sites in 2025, but not enough that it would concern me. In fact, overall, it was still the highest catches that we got. So, and the other thing that's been interesting is, so the green ones on here are the actual original release sites. So one of the other questions I had is how much are they actually spreading through the system, not just where we originally put them. So we started doing surveys where we basically just get in a kayak and go downstream and stop at a riffle at least once per mile as we go. And we've covered so far 92 river miles surveyed, approximately. Sampled 127 riffles, and we've captured them at 95 of those. So they are not only established at our original reintroduction sites, but they're spreading through the whole upper Muskingum. They're pretty thoroughly established at this point. Some of these are well downstream. So this most downstream one is below the first of those 10 dams down the main stem. So it's below Ellis Dam, if you know where that is. And we've actually caught them there for a couple of years in a row now. I think that's 26 miles downstream of a release site. So these have a fairly long, many darters do, but have a fairly long larval drift period, meaning that the larvae don't act like a darter. They're actually up in the water column trying to swim. If you see this, it looks like they're vertical and they're like bobbing up and down. So I think that you get a high water event while you got a bunch of larvae doing that and they just get pushed downstream. we haven't seen a lot of upstream movement. The one place where we've seen that a little bit is over here in the Picosing. We have gotten them up to about 6 miles upstream of the original release site. So they are expanding upstream, but at a much slower pace. Um, that's probably true over here in the Tuscarawas too, but we just haven't really looked at there yet. So, future plans with this, like I said, we're going to try and survey 2 more years. One of the things, actually, I could explain this better at the last one. One of the things that I realized is there's a lot more potentially good habitat here. There's not a dam on the Tuscarawas River until right about there. Um, so this last couple of years, in fact, we've already done this year, is we released them at 3 more places further up the Tuscarawas. So for before we walk away from this project, let them fill in that upper part of the tusk that is available to them too. Um, and so a couple more years of surveys, and then this one could be completed. But the one other thing I'd like to get is I have not spent enough time where there actually originally were populations. So in the Muskingum doing the, or sorry, in the Scioto Basin doing the exact same survey that we do at the release sites to get a baseline catch rate. It'd be nice to have that to compare our success, I guess. So, um, So that one worked so well. There's one remaining locality literally on Ohio State's campus that had, it's actually the very first record for the species in the state, decided to put them there as well. So it was in 1896 was the first record of the species in Ohio. And there's actually no additional records of Tippecanoodars in the Olentangy. It's just the one really old one. Um, there's been some work to restore the Olentangy right through Ohio State's campus, removing a dam in 2012. There's actually two dams. There was one right on the Olentangy and one on the Scioto just downstream. So, and we've got a bunch of survey data showing that the more riverine fish community has kind of returned to that section, including their close relative, the blue breast darter. So this doesn't do a lot in terms of expanding their range, but it does get them back to the last historical location. There's a dam almost 7 miles downstream, and they're right below that already in the Scioto Basin, so we're not moving them very far in this case. But it's nice to do it on campus and get class involvement. It's actually been Zach's classes that we do the follow-up surveys with this one. So began this in 2023 and decided to do this for 5 years there. So we got 3 years of follow-up surveys on this, and we didn't get any natural recruits the first year, but we got quite a few recaptures. And this past fall, we caught 106 natural recruits. So fairly quickly, they've established here in the Olentangy as well. So, and the other thing too is we've been surveying just two riffles here, and we released them right below a dam, which maybe wasn't the best choice because they can't go upstream. But the the first year we didn't get any in that downstream riffle, but I think by the second year we got them, and this year we actually caught more, I think, in the downstream riffle than the one they were released in. So which is pretty cool. It's working out very quickly, and I like that we're getting students involved in a real project too. So, um, for the last 2 years of this, and we did this for this year. Like I said, we put them right below a dam. So we released them much further upstream, kind of matched the blue breast darters range within the Olentangy up into actually the next county north, Delaware County, a little bit. So got that done this year. Hope to do that one more time next year so that we give them at least 2 years at those other sites as well to fill in the rest of the Olentangy River. So, and kind of the same story. Would like to continue to do the surveys with the classes and get a better understanding of what that natural catch rate is. So, would apply to both. So, this is what the range looks like currently after all of this effort. So, the upper part of the Muskingum Basin, they're pretty thoroughly established at this point. So this would all be from the reintroduction effort, and then this one right there, just a little bit further upstream. So kind of at the same time we did the project with tippet canoe darters in the Muskingum. We also tried to do a state extirpated species, the longhead darter. They were seen in almost the same location. It was actually two different sites, a couple of miles apart in the Wahonding River. So we used the same original six sites as with the Tippecanoe Canoe project, but these were completely extirpated from Ohio. So these actually came from Pennsylvania. The Allegheny River is the largest population of this species in the world. So we're actually bringing these across state lines, which add a little bit more complications and permits with it, but we've made it work. Um, so this is what their range looked like prior to the project. There is these records here. This is actually it. It's called Kinnickinnick Creek. It's a direct tributary to the Ohio River in Kentucky. So there is a little tiny population there, but there were no records in the main stem Ohio River. It's just these. It looks like one big black blob, but it's actually two. They're just that close together. So this one hasn't gone as well. So we're finding some. We have not found a lot of natural recruits. We're mostly recapturing tagged fish. Um, and in fact, last year we caught even less. So I'm not convinced if this one's going to work long term. I guess we are still going to stock for 2 more years because we added some additional sites to this, similar to the Tippecanoe Darter project. We were getting the best catch rates in the Tuscarawas River. So again, there's that more open space upstream. So we're trying to try that a little bit with these before we give up on it. Um, but I'm not sure if this one's going to work long term, unfortunately. So this just shows we forgot the tagging kit, and my house is more in between the Allegheny and Columbus, so we ended up tagging a bunch of fish in my basement. So even got my daughter involved, so she was a little bit bigger in this picture than the first one. So this is kind of what their range looks like. So the one thing that is kind of interesting with this is on top of us stocking these areas here and getting recaptures at some of the sites, there's a couple we still haven't even gotten a recapture at. So they decided to come back to Ohio on their own. This has nothing to do with us. So they were found in the main stem Ohio River by Ohio Division of Wildlife survey crew looking for, I think, sauger and walleye at one of their annual fall surveys below the New Cumberland Dam. I had actually been discussing this possibility with the non-game biologists of Pennsylvania. Said there are so many in the Allegheny, and we've seen all these other species kind of make their way down the Ohio. It's got to happen eventually. I had that conversation with him because we were over there catching these to move to Ohio. And literally 2 weeks later, I got a random photo just texted to me from a state fish biologist in Ohio. He didn't even say where he was. I replied, "You're at New Cumberland doing your fall tailwater survey," before he could tell me where he had caught that fish. So I just kind of expected it to happen eventually. And sure enough, it did. And we've been able to find a few up there ourselves. I found them in one tributary too. So they're moving into Ohio, even if our reintroduction isn't going great on their own. So, which is interesting. Um, yeah, I'm gonna very similar to Tippecanoe. We're gonna try and finish this out, and I haven't really quantified our catch rates on the Allegheny. We do this. This species is all boat shocking, so it's a little bit different. One of the biggest things that is different about the Allegheny River versus Tuscarawas or Wahonding and Muskingum, it's missing a lot of submerged aquatic vegetation. The Allegheny is just covered in submerged aquatic vegetation, particularly American eelgrass. And as we were doing this project, there is other people in Ohio started trying to reintroduce eelgrass into rivers separately. So we've started to try to combine these two things. Hope is that maybe we can provide some habitat for the longheads. We're seeing a little bit of success in the Tuscarawas. So that's kind of why we shifted our focus for the last couple of years to that river and are not stocking the other places anymore. So we'll see. I have a little bit of hope that maybe the Tusk will work still. So um, this one was I was approached by the manager of the Scenic Rivers program in Ohio and said, "Can we do some fish in one of our state scenic rivers? You've been doing these projects elsewhere. Let's do one of the scenic rivers." So that's Bob Gable asked me about that, and I thought about it a little bit and said there's some old records of both variegated and blue breast darters in the Stillwater River, and these are again 1800s records. So why not? Let's try it. We were successful with blue breast elsewhere, so we'll see if it works. So we started this one. We did the preliminary surveys in 2019, and then you all know what happened in 2020. We ended up actually stocking 3 of the 6 sites in 2020, despite being shut down on a lot of stuff. And then we began the other 3 in 2021. So, um, again, tried to do this as a 5-year project with these 2 species. So this is just our how many we tagged and released. We did finish this in 2025. I just didn't update the numbers. So we did complete this. We had a little bit of trouble meeting a similar goal with variegated darters. It turns out they seem to just not live naturally in as high a density, so we didn't catch as many of them. We kind of had to recalibrate our original goal of doing 200 of each per site to we aimed for closer to 100 variegates for each, and sometimes we didn't even get that. So it should say if we did that right, 300 per year. So you can see sometimes we made it, sometimes we didn't, but um, this is pretty busy, but um, basically, for the most part, you can see the still water with the blue rest starters. We're getting a pretty good increase, and in the Great Miami, pretty good increase. Variegates, I think it might actually be working because we're getting natural recruits in the still water, but for whatever reason, the Upper Great Miami I don't think we caught any last year, so I don't think that one worked either. But I think in the Stillwater we got both species established because we did actually get even more variegates here. That one's missing, but the blue rest definitely worked. Like they're reproducing really well, and we're actually seeing some captures away from the original stocking sites again there too. So um, this is the what's this one? This is the variegated darters catch per unit effort through years. We thought we were doing really well initially. The first year went really good. I don't know, I'm not sure what happened. It kind of dropped off, but then increased some again. So at least in the Stillwater sites, bluegrass much more consistent uphill going up. So it's good across all sites. This got me kind of thinking though, what about the ones that were always there? What if we compare that? And what's interesting is this is the most common darter at all these sites, uh, banded darter. And there was a similar like increase that first year and then a drop off. So, and these are the, if you look at the values of per minute, they're way higher. These guys are super common there, but it is interesting. There was still a dip. So I don't know if that was some sort of our fault of sampling consistency or what. It's hard to be positive about what is behind that, but see it with rainbow darters too, which are also just there already in common. So put them all 4 together, and you see that we just caught more fish that first year. I don't know, of all 4 of them, the common ones and the stock species. But what's cool is the blue rests are actually almost catching up with the natural background rainbow darter population by the time we finish this up. So this just shows change in range of those two. So here's the area that we are talking about as far as adding those in. I started to try to do some of those away from the release site surveys. I don't have that stuff added to these maps yet, though. So we are seeing blue rest more so than the variegates doing that. So next one. This is a state endangered fish. So the spotted darter is state endangered in Ohio. We really just have one good population in Big Darby Creek. There is a very minimal existing population in the Cocosing River. It's the only place in the whole Muskingum Basin that they still existed. But it really comes down to they're essentially on 3 riffles in about a quarter-mile stretch. And what's weird about this is they've always been there. There's a flood control dam just downstream of that. So the Cocosing and the Mohican come together to form the Wahonding. There's a flood control dam on the Wahonding. When they close that due to the high water, it becomes a reservoir temporarily, and it backs up almost to where these exist. I don't think that's a coincidence. These have they're a little less, they're known to be less fecund, so they produce less eggs than some of these other species I've already talked about. And they provide more parental care. These actually guard their eggs, where none of the other ones we've talked about do that. So they seem to be slower to recruit. And they have that larval drift period. My theory, this is just based off observation and theory, is that those larvae are drifting into this terrible habitat from this flood control dam. So this population is just barely hanging on at the top end of where that is when it becomes a reservoir. It's very temporary. It lasts a week when it becomes a reservoir, but that whole area has a lot of sediment, not very good substrate. It's actually the only stretch we couldn't find typic canoe darters in when we did these kind of going between the sites surveys. So the cocosing has a lot more good habitat much further upstream. So maybe if we get them established up, they can fill in to where that existing population is. So that's what we're trying to do with this one. Pretty stable population in Darby as our donor source. But still, they are state endangered, and we just have that one good population. So we're doing 2 riffles a year in the cocosing and aiming for 75 fish per riffle, so 150 total. So being more cautious with this because of all the things I just kind of laid out. But I'm cautiously optimistic this one's working. I don't have 2025 on this one either, but we saw an increase. We actually got a couple more natural recruits. It's low numbers, but it is going up each year. So we completed the 5 years of stocking at the original sites last year. And whoops, I guess I didn't have anything else for that. For the next couple of years, decided because those seem to be working, I think this one's even longer lived. We get all 5 tag colors when we did the survey last fall. So they're surviving and staying there, and they seem to be longer lived. So I picked 2 new riffles this year and that are in the same general area to start stocking that. So we did that this year for the first time. So we're gonna now stock those 2 riffles 5 years. So we're going to have 10 years total for this project eventually too. So we're at year 6 with this one. The newest translocation we did is this one with Mountain Mad Toms. So we've done 2 years of this so far. This is actually next on the list to do this year as far as moving fish around. So this will be in the next couple of weeks. We're going to be going out and trying to capture these guys. Similar thing, except we only chose 3 sites with this one in the Hocking River. And again, they hadn't been in the Hocking in a long time. These are actually fairly common in the places where we put the tip canoe darters in the upper Muskingum. So we're actually, some of the finding typic canoes at new locations is when we're out getting Mountain Mad Toms to move to the Hocking. So, which is kind of nice. It's sort of doing 2 things at once. And aiming for 300 a year across these 3 sites. So we did get recaptured the first year. I think we had 3 or 4. It probably says on there somewhere the first year. Maybe it's the next slide. But that's, I think, the very first one we recaptured. And this is a couple of the Division Wildlife guys and myself that were helping with that when we first got one. So yeah, I think that's all I had on that. We actually got a couple young a year the second year. So so that it's pretty early, but hopeful early on. We'll see how that goes. So from there, kind of transition into some of this captive breeding with the glacial kettle lake species. So this started basically the same time as that first translocation project of doing these 2 things at the same time. This kind of came out of, I originally, as my senior research project in college, tried to breed long-eared sunfish and see if they were marketable as aquarium fish. That was the premise of my senior research project in college, and had 2 little rubber line ponds. So I gained a lot of experience breeding native fish in these little tiny rubber line ponds because I continued with that all the way through present day. I still do that at home too. And I had written letters to the chief of Division Wildlife getting permission to keep these extirpated wetland fish in my backyard and learned how to breed them all. So I didn't really even need to experiment with it. I knew it would work before I even started. But I wasn't allowed to release them anywhere, doing this at home. So um, explained that I had done this and got permission to start doing it for real at Ohio State in 2016. 10 species included in the program, and eight, it's actually nine now that have been successfully bred in captivity. We got a new one this year. So anyways, a lot of these are not rare in the big picture. It's just we're on the fringe of their range. There's the new one this year actually is pretty rare. So this is the whole list. Of these in the big picture, this is the rarest one, the pug-nosed shiner, and that's the one we've um, successfully bred this year and hope to do a release this year for the first time. So uh, most of these, think about this, I think all but two of these, well, sorry, three of these once occurred right there in the harbor. So none of them are there anymore. There's a slight chance of a spotted gar, but the rest of these are unfortunately all gone from Put-in Bay here. But they were all here at one point in time. Um, the ones that weren't, there's no records of pirate perch out in the lake. Um, their least starter, I don't think was out in the lake. It might actually be just those two. I think the rest of them were all here in Put-in Bay at one point in time. So um, this is just little 16-foot square rubber lined ponds. We have 7 at OSU, and now we have 2 county park systems that have these. And we've produced it. And again, I don't know if I have, yeah, I don't have all the 2025 ones on here. So we're over 20,000 fish that we've bred in these little tiny rubber lined ponds and released of all these state endangered fish at quite a few places across the state at this point. So this kind of gives you an idea what these look like. We have one bigger one that was used for the spotted gar. That's constructing the bigger one. Just those are the smaller ones for all the smaller species. No pumps, no filters, no, these aren't heated or anything like that. We basically set them up to try to be as natural as possible. The only fish we ever actually fed were the spotted gar. And really we just have golden shiners in with them that are reproducing on top of them, and they just eat those. We're not actually actively feeding any of the smaller species in any way. Put the adult broodstock in the fall, and then by the following spring, they just reproduce on their own. Just make it as natural as possible for them. So um, these are kind of all the different groups that have been involved or places that we've stocked fish. We initially started out with Columbus Metro Parks, and then we've kind of expanded from there. So um, with the Metro Parks, these were just little man-made ponds on Columbus Metro Parks that they're mostly in their prairie areas that they meant to be little wetland ponds, and they were for the most part fishless. The first one ended up green sunfish showed up soon after we stocked it, which did not go well for our stock fish. There's still a few in there. I've been there recently, and there's still a few, but they're not doing great with the green sunfish. And these are pretty small. I think that first one is maybe a quarter of an acre, so it's a really small little pond. Then we moved to Scioto Grove Metro Park the next year. They had 2 bigger ponds there. These are probably closer to an acre apiece. There was no fish there at all. Eventually, fathead minnows showed up in there, and they seem to be persisting okay with the fatheads. But these two have become such good populations. Sometimes we can actually pull fish from those ponds to stock elsewhere too. It gives us a larger source. We tried some more ponds at another Columbus Metro Park later, but only one worked for a couple of years, and then that pond dried up. So that one kind of went away. Tried to do a pirate perch project on the St. Mary's River. There's old records there, and there's a good population in the Upper Auglaize. Stocked these for 5 years. Initially, I thought it was going to work. We got 3 little juveniles and got some recaptures the very first year. We never saw another one. So I don't think this one worked either, but we gave it a shot. Potential, we might try a new project with this species either this year or next year. Trying work on some potential funding for that. So, um, Summit County Metro Parks found out we were doing this and was very interested. And they basically built their own little set of ponds, and they have been releasing six of these state listed fish. In initially, they started in basically some old quarries. These are pretty small old quarries, but if you think about what a glacial kettle lake is, a glacial kettle lake is a small natural lake. A lot of times they have a shallow edge and then they drop off pretty deep. Very small watershed, low nutrient. A man-made quarry is kind of the same thing. It's unfortunate that it's man-made, but a lot of times they're very clear, low nutrient. Have if they've been sitting there for a while, they have some aquatic vegetation that kind of mimics a glacial kettle lake. Unfortunately, most of our glacial kettle lakes in Ohio are very enriched at this point. Probably won't even support these species. Um, we're seeing success at these quarries, which I don't know how I feel about that because it's not really where they originally were, but at least we have these fish in Ohio again, where in some cases they were completely gone from the state. So, um, this one that they're using is actually adjacent Long Lake, which had most of these fish in the past. So it is literally right next to where they used to be. So I figured that's close enough. And they've got reproduction of at least five of the six species that they stocked in there at this point. And they're in the case of the two shiners, though, black chin and black nose, they're abundant. So they're doing really well in there. Um, this one, that one has, they took the two little quarries and they kind of shaved down the berm in the middle. It made a shallow wetland in the middle. And the Western band and killifish are loving that little wetland area that connects the two. So, which is pretty cool to see. Um, they've continued to stock their fish in a couple other places. And actually, next week, I think they're up to three sites. So, next week, we're doing our follow up surveys for those three sites for this year. The second one they did is in Cuyahoga Valley National Park. It's another quarry that they call Indigo Lake, and again, this seems to be working really well in there as well. This one's kind of fun because we just go in there and snorkel and look at the fish, and it's just cool to snorkel in a school of hundreds, if not 1,000, of state endangered minnows just swimming around in a quarry. Um, um, we've tried this, started in Nimisila Reservoir. This pretty early for their third one here, so we'll see on that one. It's adjacent to Portage Lakes. In fact, it sits above them, and these used to be in the Portage Lakes. We tried restocking Turkey Foot Lake, recaptured one of each of the shiners, one individual. Unfortunately, I don't think that that's going to work, which is sad because it is the original site for these things, um, but I do think Nimisila being as clear and as diverse vegetation as it has, I'm hopeful that that could work. So it's just the man-made site next to the original ones, though. Um, did a project with Spotted Gar in Ashtabula Harbor. This was funding that was specific for Ashtabula Harbor. This had some delays because of COVID too. And the thing with this one is like it had a limited time frame, and we're working with predatory fish that's longer lived. So I'm not sure I will get to see an answer of whether or not it worked with this because of the longer lifespan of this fish in short time period of what we actually worked on it. So um, the nice thing about this is the funding was tied to that basin. So we found two beaver ponds in the headwaters of the basin and stocked three of the other wetland species in those and got to see some better success with that. The gar coming from Presque Isle Bay, which is probably at least on the US side of Lake Erie, the best population. This is over in Pennsylvania. So we get brood stock from there. These, we couldn't get them to spawn on their own, so we're actually using overprim to inject them to induce spawning. Are look really weird. They look like tadpoles. They don't even look like a fish. I thought that was kind of cool to see these guys develop. And then released our sort of advanced fingerlings in October back in Ashtabula Harbor. We didn't produce a lot of those. We got, I think our best year, we got 16. So not great in terms of our actual releases, but We got a little better at it as we went, but like I said, funding ran out and we just done the project because of that more than anything. Fortunately, the two beaver ponds in the headwaters of the basin, um, at the end of this project, the lake chub suckers are the state threatened fish, are the most abundant fish in these beaver ponds. So very successful in terms of those ones, even if they really don't have a great answer on the gar. And the other two, the black nose, shiner, and Iowa darter, are also persisting in these at a lower amount, but they're definitely persisting in there. So um, actually, I already kind of mentioned this, but we tried stocking Turkeyfoot Lake, which is a highly modified original glacial kettle lake. It still has Iowa darters and lake chub suckers, but none of the other species still exist in there. We've stocked the two shiners and western banded killifish in there quite a few times at this point. We've gotten a single recapture of a black nose and a single recapture of a black chin. So not sure if that's gonna pan out. So um, Medina County started most recently, and they came to us after hearing about this, actually from Summit County Metro Parks, and wanted to do kind of copy what Summit was doing. They own a bunch of quarries they call Killbuck Lakes. We've been to this one already this year and can say that I don't think we got a chub sucker, right? But we got lots. The Iowa darters are thoroughly established in this quarry. There are hundreds of black nose and black chin shiners swimming around in there. Seems to be working quite well here again. So, and this has a connection to a stream. So there were already some other kind of glacial lake species that people don't typically think of stocking in there, including central mud minnow and pumpkin seeds, bowfin. So it's kind of cool that it has a little bit more of what is fitting for that fish community in there. New projects. So, I'm working with a sport fish for the first time. So this is new this year. Muskellunge are actually state listed. People don't realize that they're on the lowest rung of the state list, and we don't have a lot of wild reproductive populations. So they're thought of as this big predatory fish that you just go fish for in a lake. And there are lake populations, but all of our populations in Ohio that most people fish for are stocked reservoirs, and they really don't reproduce in those reservoirs. Our wild populations are in surprisingly small streams. Most of those are in southern Ohio. There is one in the Lake Erie Basin, the Upper Grand River, but the rest of them are all in southern Ohio. Um, there was actually a previous master's thesis that studied Raccoon Creek specifically and said that it was the best choice if you're going to do a muskie reintroduction in terms of habitat. So you just went for it because there was this previous study on that system, and basically they didn't do it because of being cost prohibitive. Um, I was able to convince the Division of Wildlife to let me take their excess fry from the hatcheries. They wouldn't let me take the advanced fingerlings that are precious to stock in the reservoirs at the end of the year to support the sport fishery. So I got the calls from the hatchery that they were going to throw out anyways. And so we stocked, I think, 287,000 sack fry and then came back through the same six locations with, I think it was like 78,000 swim up fry a couple weeks later that they were going to throw out. So we'll see. We're going to go do follow-up surveys sometime next month to see if we find any. So this is brand new. So, and because I was kind of thinking about this project, my wife has bothered me for years to take her to one of these little creeks I catch muskie in so she could finally catch one. But we got her her first muskie this year. So we showed up and I kayaked this little tiny stream and fished for these. It's a wild population. It's not anywhere near any stocked reservoir. And before we even got in the kayaks, I was standing on the bridge. So there's one right there. And so was able to tell her like cast right over there. Her second cast, she placed the lure right and literally just I told her hit the bank past the fish, hit the bank with the lure, made it actually jump off the shoreline and it hit it instantly. So it was before we even got in the boats. So that was pretty cool. Also last year, actually, we tried to start a lake sturgeon reintroduction in the Ohio River Basin. They were also found in the Ohio River Basin, not just up here in Lake Erie. So we're trying to take the excess fish from the Toledo project on the Maumee and take them down to the Scioto River in Columbus. Um, Last year, I think essentially due to some hatchery complications, we only ended up with 30 fish. So, but we did release some in the Ohio River Basin for the first time last year. 30 individuals in Circleville on the side of the river. Hopefully, we'll get a few more this year. So, starting some new wetland projects in hopefully in Portage County and did one in the upper part of Big Darby Creek Basin in some beaver ponds as well. And we did our first follow-up survey there and we got two of the three species stocked. So in the first follow-up surveys, going well. So I think that's kind of it. So, oh yeah, I always try to get these are my pictures, my blackmail pictures of all my past interns, right? So this is on the Allegheny River. Usually on the Allegheny, we go over to get our long heads, we catch tons of Ohio lamprey. So yeah. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer questions. Sure. That you're planning to do in the future? I don't know. I think about that. Like, what would I want to do next? Yeah. So, one that I think would be really cool to do would be alligator gar, but we're on the fringe of their range in the upper Ohio River Basin and um might try to do some preliminary work for that, but we'll see if that actually ever gets going. So sure. Um, Logical benefits have you seen or do you expect to see from reintroducing fish? Yeah, I kind of think of it as like putting a piece of the puzzle back. We may not even be able to understand fully like what sort of an effect it has. Um, I think the one thing that I probably can say we've seen is with some of the darter species, some of the ones that have always persisted there, we actually seem like maybe we're making those drop in abundance, which is actually balancing that darter riffle community a little bit. I think we could say we have evidence of that. That's probably the one thing that like I can actually see. I wonder about some of these quarries too, if we're adding more forage essentially for the sport fish, which may benefit fishermen. So that's also potentially a positive benefit from these. But to me, it's sort of the intrinsic value of just putting pieces of the fish community back together the way it once was. To me, that's the biggest value from it. So, sure. Like, um, in fact. Yeah. So we've designed that to at least be 3 years initially there because that is about when they reach maturity. So they grow a lot faster than like a sturgeon or some of the gar. So we really think there's a chance they could reproduce at year three. So um, it seems kind of crazy that a fish that gets that big only takes that long, but they're much faster growing than some of the. Um, this is kind of based off reservoir growth rates, but still it should be similar. Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. So, um, and one of the questions that came up with doing Raccoon Creek was there were some concerns that were brought to us of you're putting a giant predator in a little creek. And so I did a little bit of research about the existing wild populations to show how small is the watershed where I find these native wild populations. And we put the most upstream release site in Raccoon is still 100 square miles. Some of these, that site where I had the picture of myself and my wife catching muskie, it's 15 square miles. So it's plenty big enough. Is really the answer, But so I tried to alleviate those concerns by showing that there should be plenty of space in fish community there for them to be able to persist. Yeah.
Do you have any idea why you're having difficulty well, not you, but they're having difficulty keeping those fish reproducing in those reservoirs inside those reservoirs.
There's not the habitat. So muskie spawn on flooded vegetation. I actually got to witness this spring. I was out for something else, on the main stem Scioto River, and came up to a gravel bar that is covered in water willow that was slightly flooded. It had about that much water over top the water willow. And before we even got the shock boat up there, I saw these two fish kind of thrashing around in the water willow, thinking, is that really what I'm seeing? But sure enough, it was a pair of muskie up there on that flooded gravel bar thrashing around spawning. So there just isn't that habitat in the reservoirs. So that's really the difference.
This is just a exploratory question here. Has there been any effort to try to recreate that if they know that's how they produce in other reservoirs?
No, because most of the reservoirs, recreation and fisheries is secondary to flood control. So you would have to intentionally flood the shoreline at the right timing and do some manipulation to do that. The other thing is there are really large bass populations in most Ohio reservoirs, and bass are really good at eating small muskie. This is actually why Ohio Division of Wildlife holds them in the hatcheries until October, and they stock them at 12 inches. So they're they're pretty big. They basically grow them to the point where they're too big for the bass to consume. Um, so that is, yeah. In these streams, there's bass there, but they're part of the natural community. They should be part of the natural community. It's a lot more diverse. There's a lot more variety of species in the streams than what there is in a reservoir. So um, most Ohio reservoirs probably lucky you get 15 species in one, where you catch 70 species at a single stream site sometimes. So
Right. Let's thank Brian. If anyone has any more questions, I'm sure Brian would love to talk
they're actually staying here tonight.
Yeah.
So.
On the volleyball court. I'm just kidding.
Next week for RU presentations, that actually starts a little earlier, so 6:30 for the RU presentation. So come to your mind.
Yeah.
Those of you online, I'm gonna put up a survey if you want to take it. If not, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for joining us.